Warning! This video contains spoilers. If you have not played this awesome game yourself yet, I strongly advise you to do so before watching this. Hey there, I'm ShortySX, and today I'll be showing you how to take down Sephiroth, arguably one of the most iconic, badass, and just awesome villains of all time. And this is a fight which definitely does not disappoint, if you ask me. Now, we'll be doing this on hard difficulty, which is obviously a more demanding fight than normal, but naturally you can just take any of the lessons or tactics from here and apply them to the normal version of the fight, and you should do much better as well.
Let's finish this.
Okay, now right off the bat I want to discuss a few tactics which are best learned right at the beginning at this early stage of the boss fight, and we'll talk about, setup, materia, and preparation later on. The first thing you obviously want to do is make sure you actually learn and pay attention to whatever move Sephiroth's actually using. Now in this first section, countering is by far the most important, which is what you'll see me do right about now to his move Telluric Fury. That's simply one of his attack moves which can easily be counterable, whether it's, just swapping over to Punisher mode and holding block, or using your counter stance attack. Both can be exceptionally effective in this fight because the counter stance ability does a ton of damage if you pull it off, while the normal counter not only prevents a bunch of the damage and lets you dish out some of your own, but it also builds up your ATB bar, meaning more counter stances and more abilities in general. But let's quickly look at another ability he uses here, which is Scintilla, which is basically his counter attack. Now every time he uses Scintilla, what you want to do is make sure you pull back and you're not attacking him, and wait until it pretty much just fades, at which point you can unleash any number of abilities on it. Now the extra benefit of this approach, especially if you're countering him, is that you're building up a ton of stagger, which is of course how you not only move the fights to the next stage, but how you just deal a good amount of damage as a whole. Remember, that's a very good tip in general. You need to be building up enough stagger and know which abilities give you more. But now that we've moved the fight to the next stage, things do get a little bit tougher. He gains a bunch of new abilities like Aeolian Onslaught, which you might have some trouble mitigating or countering. As you can see, I try evading it, I try blocking, and it still deals its damage, but the damage is not that crazy, so it's not that big a deal. He continues to use his Scintilla and his Telluric Fury, so you can just keep on countering and avoiding those just like you did with the first part. You'll notice I keep using Blade Burst to counter his Scintilla, but honestly you could use any number of other abilities. I do like Blade Burst just because it's ranged and I have it bound to one of my keys, but that's it. Well, once you do enough damage, or fail to, Sephiroth will once again take things to the next level. At this point, just remember that all of these changes are heavily based on how much stagger you're building on your opponent, which directly affects how much damage you're also doing. But the good thing with this part of the fight is that you actually get support.
Did you miss me?
Not really. He's tough.
Yeah, so what? Screw him.
You gotta love Aerith. But yeah, screw him. We could totally beat him, right? So, a couple of new attacks to deal with. First off, you can see Mass Immune and Waiting, clearly a sword attack, much harder, and while you can counter it, it doesn't quite work as efficiently as before. As you can also see, he moves ridiculously fast at this point, and has the ability to just jump between your characters without any problem. Of course, the benefit with having a second character is the ability to actually heal, which is probably why you can't, deflect all of his abilities. You can currently see that I'm still countering something like Telluric Fury, but it's not working perfectly. So the way to go with this part of the fight is definitely to use a lot more counter stance as opposed to just simple counters. Now with all these cases, like with the new abilities, whether it's his use of Aeroga or Hell's Gate or Aeolian Onslaught or Mass Immune and Waiting, just try to mitigate as much damage as you can and keep on building, stagger and damage on Sephiroth himself. Now, one general tip, which I covered during my previous video on Pride and Joy, but definitely applies to Sephiroth and many other bosses, is to be mindful of who you're actually controlling. If you're controlling Cloud, he's quite tanky, he can counter, he's a good target for Sephiroth's attacks. If you swap over to controlling one of your supportive characters, like, let's say, Aerith, she's a lot weaker. She can't really block all of his attacks as efficiently, she can't counter them, and whoever you're controlling is who the boss or Sephiroth will actually focus on. So the best thing to do here is to try to only use your supportive characters by not actually swapping to them, but by using R2 or L2 and having them perform commands while you're still controlling Cloud. So the few times when I actually do swap over to Aerith, it's because she doesn't have an ATB bar already, which means she can't perform the heal or ability I need her to, so you want to swap over to her and, perform a few basic commands, just so you can build up your ATB bar. But again, as a general rule, unless Sephiroth is performing a specific attack on, let's say, Cloud and you have a few seconds of free time, you don't want to be swapping over to one of your supportive or long-range characters and just thinking, oh, I can just cast attacks from far away and he'll never swap to me, because that's just not what happens. But as I say that, I've managed to stagger Sephiroth yet again, which means we're taking this fight to yet another phase. Now the quick little note to myself here is that I could have definitely done a lot more damage during the stagger phase. Both characters actually had a lot of ATB bars. I could have and should have done a lot more, but like I just told you not to, I was controlling Aerith and kind of lost track of what was happening and just enjoying the cool visuals. Well, in this next part of the fight, things again get a little bit tougher than they did before. Sephiroth will keep on doing a lot more damage, more of his attacks will actually break through your counters, and using something like counter stance is again even more useful, just because it deals a lot of damage and stagger and all of that. Now, the key here, just like the previous fight, is probably just to make sure that your characters are healed, topped off, and well protected. Now, you will see me use Regen, which is definitely a nice little supportive ability, but you could also use things I'm not currently using, like let's say cast Barrier on your characters, or just on Cloud, or use things like Haste, which will definitely make the fight even easier, but again, it's a matter of what materia you can fit where and what that will mean giving up. But as this is definitely an epic and in many ways classic Final Fantasy boss fight, we're moving on to yet another stage. And in this case, that means One-Winged Sephiroth, which I'm sure all of you recognize. Well, needless to say, the boss fight gets even tougher at this point, but again, the added benefit is that we get one more character, in this case, Tifa.
Tifa! What'd I miss?
Let's go.
Well, now it's time for a full party fight. And again, things are definitely tougher, so be careful. In this case, you definitely want to pay attention to what kind of infusion he's actually using. In this case, he's using Wind. By the way, epic scene right there, I just have to say like that, slow frame. Anyway, the point is, if you can, again, this is all based on what material you actually have equipped, whether you have elemental magic like, fire, ice, lightning, or, wind equipped, like that determines how easy this part of the fight is. If you can, you should definitely be casting the opposite of whatever infusion he uses. In this case, he uses wind infusion, so if I had lightning, I would want to use lightning. If he casts fire infusion, you obviously want to be using ice, etc, etc. If you can't do that, the main thing you want to be focusing on this part of the fight is to actually put enough damage and pressure Sephiroth. Because the way it works is he'll pretty much keep attacking and using the same level of infusion up until you either pressure him or you don't, and he will use Octaslash. So the key really here is for you to do enough damage to pressure Sephiroth before he does Octaslash. Because, well, if you don't, like I just didn't, he will use it, and obviously it's a powerful move. Now the good part about Octaslash though is that while he's casting it or using it on one of your characters, you can swap to your other characters and you have quite a large window during which you can put on quite a bit of damage because Sephiroth is just, sitting there beating up on your Cloud or whoever. The other good part about this is that after he finishes using Octaslash, you still have a bit of a window in which you can fully heal or even potentially revive one of your characters. Now, of course, you want to have enough health to make sure they don't die, so you don't have to recast any positive abilities and so on, but yeah. The irony here is I managed to stagger him right after he finished using Octaslash, which is a bit of a shame, but it's a great time to, use your limit breaks if you have them, use any other abilities, pretty much just do damage. Now you can also see that I've been countering fairly efficiently, even using counter stance quite a bit, but it's still not doing as much damage and it's not building up as much stagger as it did in the earlier phases. Now, don't get me wrong, that's still the way to go, as in you should still be countering his moves as much as you can, especially with counter stance, because it is the way to build up stagger and damage on Sephiroth. I'm just saying it's not as effective as it was in the earlier stages. But don't let that discourage you. Just be careful and focus on mitigating any damage that he might put out to either you or the whole party, because, well, that's the hard part, as in making sure you do enough damage and that you're pressuring Sephiroth, while also making sure you stay alive and your party is not, dying or focusing too much on healing or reviving and so on. Now, I'll say it again, this is definitely a great part of the fight where you should use some magic if you have it equipped, because he will swap infusions, as in you can see now he's gone over to ice, meaning that if I were to cast or use fire-based attacks on him, they would do a lot more damage and build up the stagger. I'm not really doing that, I'm kind of just focusing on the sword versus sword part of the fight, but either way. Now, the final thing you definitely want to make sure you do in this stage of the fight is when he gets pressured and you're close to staggering him, like I am now, is to make sure you're actually prepared for when you do stagger him. In my case, that means going over to Tifa and making sure she casts enough, unbridled strength, so she can immediately use, her Omni Strike and improve that stagger percentage by quite a bit, which just means you can do that much more damage. This is obviously where you also want to make sure everybody's topped off because, well, we're about to transition to the final phase of the fight.
One more shot. Bring it.
Alright, now while I could talk about how epic I think this fight is actually for like hours, we don't have time to do that, so let's just talk about the final phase of this boss fight and how to actually deal with it. So here, Sephiroth stops using his I'm gonna run around and slash the crap out of you approach and adopts a more I'm gonna float in the middle of the battlefield and pretend I'm a god approach. And maybe not so much pretend, but anyway, the point is that the fight now is significantly different from what it was before, so you need to approach it a little bit differently. First thing you notice is he starts counting down from 9, which should not get to 0 because guess what, you fail at that point. It's pretty entertaining, check it out if you're curious, but yeah, let's avoid that. Now he also gets a set of new abilities, one of the most annoying of which is, here we go, Heartless Angel. In which case, he pretty much throws down his mass immune, and in a pretty wide area of effect around it, everybody hit by the ability gets their health reduced to 1. Now, while that's really bad, obviously, the good thing is, just like Octaslash, there's a bit of a window right after he uses Heartless Angel, during which you should have enough time to actually heal all of your characters. Just make sure that whoever your healer is, like in my case, Aerith, someone you have, let's say, Magnify plus healing materia, linked, someone like that has enough ATB bars to actually cast the heal after Heartless Angel. That's why if you, let's say, are using Aerith as a healer, you pretty much don't want to be wasting her ATB bars on, unnecessary things or attacks that won't really do all that much, and just focus on making sure people are healed. As you can see, he uses Heartless Angel pretty often, and if you don't have enough heals or, just can't respond quickly enough, it will kill you. 1 health is not a lot. But if you heal through it, no big deal. The other new attack he gains is called Shadow Flare, which pretty much just spawns a bunch of circles of, magical flare around the stage, and you have to do your best to avoid them. I say best because I'm not really sure avoiding them entirely is the way to go. Again, the main objective in this part of the fight is to just keep putting out as much damage as you can on Sephiroth. Like, that's the whole point. You need to kill him before he gets to 0. So the more time you spend avoiding something like Shadow Flare, the more time you're wasting and not actually putting out enough damage. Again, you have to find a balance for yourself between how much you can heal, how much you can tank, and how much damage you need to actually be dealing. But again, if you've actually gotten this far into the fight, chances are you'll probably beat it. Just be patient, make sure all your characters are properly healed. You can see I have a little bit of a near miss scare over here. But again, this is not the hardest bit. It's pretty much just doing enough damage, making sure your characters are healed. Now, beyond that, I'll discuss my materia and equipment as a whole after the cutscene, but for now, just enjoy because the fight is over.
Well.
Barret! Welcome back. We can do this. We can. We can change it. Make it right. Cloud!
Quickly.
Alright, well now that the actual fight is finally over, let's quickly go over my setup and a few tips and tricks as far as, materia and equipment is concerned, because there are a few things you could use to make the whole thing a little bit easier for yourself. Now also remember that all of this is really tailored to the hard difficulty version of the fight, because if you're doing this on, your first playthrough on normal, you should already have enough gear and enough levels and enough, progress on your weapons and so on to actually make the fight fairly manageable. And most of the things I'm discussing here, as far as materia obviously apply, but they will be slightly different. So anyway, the first thing you notice is that all of my characters are obviously level 50, max level, which is kind of a given. As in, if you start the game on hard, by the time you get through the first couple of chapters, if not by the time you actually just finish the game on normal, your characters will already be max level, so that's a bit of a given. The other part that's a bit of a given is that if you have finished everything on hard difficulty up until the very last chapter, you already have all the manuscripts, which means all of your weapons actually have enough points to be fully leveled. And, you'll have absolutely everything. In case that's not, the situation for you, or in case you're playing this on normal, just remember that you still have enough points. All this means is that if you're using something like, let's say, the Buster Sword, you should focus on what you're actually using it for. In the way I just played the boss fight in the video you just saw, I pretty much only used Cloud for physical attacks. So his Buster Sword really didn't need any, MP or magic attack or anything of that sort. So if you don't have all the points, just make sure you allocate them properly. I definitely suggest prioritizing things like health because, extra HP really goes a long way. Now, beyond that, let's quickly discuss my actual equipment. So you can kind of see that on all three characters, I am actually using pretty much these starred weapons. And this is more of a trend I just used for my entire playthrough of hard difficulty, more from a, role-playing perspective or whatever, but this shouldn't really make that much of a difference. As you can see that I'm using Cloud's Buster Sword, the leather gloves for Tifa, and, well, the silver staff for Aerith instead of her, guard stick. But that's just, a style preference, and it's mostly because if you actually, level up the silver staff, you'll notice that it has a lot of abilities that are kind of geared towards mana regeneration. It's one of the few staffs that gives you, cost reduction when it comes to healing and attacking spells, as you can see right now with 20%. And also gives you that 50% mana regeneration boost, which is really nice. So just as a general weapon to, play through the entire game on hard difficulty with, the Silver Staff was my choice, and kind of what I went with, which is also why I used it for the final fight. But again, this is mostly even style preference, it's not so much because the Buster Sword is the best. If you use something like the Hard Edge, which has a lot more, attack power, it'll probably give you an easier time. But again, do whatever you like. Now, as far as the actual equipment, you'll notice that my other equipment is fairly straightforward as well. As in, I'm using the Force bracelets, which, don't really give you a lot of, defense, whether it's magical or normal attack, but it doesn't really matter. The main reason for me choosing them is because, they give you 4 materia slots as opposed to 3, if we're using, the ones tailored for physical defense or magical defense. But at this point, again, all my characters actually have enough HP and so on to survive. As you saw, I didn't really have survivability issues during the fight, so that's kind of why I'm using them. I'm just trying to, level up materia and equip as much as possible. Now, the final option as far as the accessory is concerned, you can see that for Tifa and Cloud, I'm using the Champion belt, which is, just an awesome accessory, which gives you 5% strength and 10% HP. It stacks really nicely with HP up materia and so on, which is why I'm using it. With Aerith, I'm using the healing accessory because, it just improves your healing quite a bit, and I find it to be, nicer. It's not like you really need that 10% HP. But the one thing I should cover, which I'm not using just by choice, is the Gotterdammerung, which is of course the item you get by beating the ultimate weapon in the Shinra simulator, and it's just because I think this item is rather overpowered. It not only makes you start each fight with, full limit break, but it makes the limit breaks, charge up a lot quicker. So yeah, if I were to use this, the entire final fight would be a lot simpler, just like, any other part of the game. It almost makes parts trivial, so that's why I'm not really using it. But alright, let's talk about the material, which is of course probably the most important bit. Now, the first thing over here, I've loved Deadly Dodge since I started playing the game. It's definitely quite nice, but both of these first materia are not really all that necessary, especially for the final Sephiroth fight. This is mostly just, again, a style preference because I really like, that color on my Buster Sword, and that's kind of almost as far as it goes. For the majority of my playthrough, I actually had an AP up materia right here, and then, paired that up with one of my, let's say, HP up materials because that was a quick way of ranking that up. But anyway, that's for another video. For now, as far as Sephiroth is concerned, you pretty much want to focus on, making sure you're able to survive. And the few good things, of course, are things like HP up materia. Make sure you can see that, my Cloud has 9.5k health, which is enough. I've given my other more ranked up HP materials to Tifa, and then 2 fully ranked ones on Aerith because, she kind of, as you can see, lacks the HP. Even with 2 full ones, she only has 8.2k, but again, that's more of an issue with what weapon you're using and so on and so on. The point is that beyond things like HP up material, the one material I found to be very useful is the Steadfast block material. This is again something I've actually used for the majority of the game, especially on hard difficulty, and it's awesome. Because every time you're blocking something, it not only, reduces the damage you're taking, and you saw how much I actually block and countered, a boss like Sephiroth, But the added benefit is that it also makes your ATB fill up that much faster. So this is an excellent materia, especially for a boss like Sephiroth, who you want to be, countering and blocking for a big percentage of the fight. Like, this is what then gives you the ability to use something like counter stance, because every time you block, ta-da, you're building up more ATB. So again, excellent choice, definitely fully suggested. Something like First Strike is, a nice little perk, but you want to consider how much you're giving up for the materia slot, because, it's not always necessary. You can go without it. I also always have assess on at least one character. In this case, I kind of kept it on Cloud because I noticed that I hadn't actually assessed Sephiroth last time I played him. So, that's just a little thing, no big deal. Just make sure you do actually have at least healing materia on your characters. Obviously, for the parts where, Cloud is alone, that's quite necessary. But the other thing is you also want to make sure that enough of your characters have a revival materia. Now, this is more specific to hard mode because, on hard mode, you cannot use items. So if a character dies, the only way to actually revive them is to use revival materia. And if only, let's say, your Aerith has revival materia and she happens to die, then, well, you're screwed. So that's why you want to make sure that you have revival materia on at least 2 of your characters, preferably all 3 if you can fit it. As you can see here, I didn't have one on Cloud, but that's okay. Now, the other, let's call it useful little tip here, is that you could go for the elemental defense type of approach, as I have done with both Cloud and Tifa. You can see that, if you have your elemental materia, whether it's rank 2 or 3, it just means you're going to be either immune or even absorb certain elements. Now, the funny little irony in this case is that with the battle you just saw, Sephiroth kind of used wind infusion and then ice infusion, so the 2 elements I was actually prepared to deal with, he didn't touch. Now, of course, what I could have used is to actually cast these abilities during, the battle itself. So when he swapped over to wind infusion, I could have just used Cloud to cast lightning. When he swapped over to ice infusion, I could have used fire on him or, Firaga and so on. But at the same time, not that necessary. This is just a nice little bonus, and especially if you're trying to, rank up your elemental materia, it's probably the reason I've had it equipped at some point or, throughout the entire game for whatever reason. But yeah, that's really the necessities. Beyond that, I would say that for your, healing character, whether that's Aerith or someone else, you probably want to include a bunch of the magic up materia, as well as, let's say, MP up materia. It's not as necessary as, I might make it out to be, but at the same time, you can look at my Aerith and see that she has 159 magic, which is significantly higher than my other characters. And that obviously presents certain benefits. Like, she can cast 1 Cura and ta-da, the entire party is fairly well healed. And by the way, here's a quick note. When you saw me cast Cura during the actual boss fight as opposed to Curaga, that was usually intentional because Curaga has a much longer cast time. So if, let's say, your Cloud is close to death or you need to quickly recover because you're on 1 HP or something of the sort, it's often quite nice to actually use Cura because it's a faster cast time. And, it's kind of the same deal with Prayer. Like, Prayer is an amazing ability, but just because you need 2 ATB bars to even cast it, it's not that useful. Which is why I really suggest using your one and only Magnify Materia with healing. You could, of course, use it with Haste or Barrier for multicasting those spells and, giving yourself an advantage that way, but I've always just liked having it on healing. And that's it. For the rest, honestly, you could use a lot of different things. You can see that I'm actually using ATB boost on Aerith. I've also used that on Tifa or Cloud. It's just a nice little thing which, every 2 minutes gives you an ATB boost, which is quite useful. You could, again, use things like Barrier or Haste for all your characters, just because they're nice buffs, but I don't find them as necessary. The final little thing which you could consider using are all the types of materia, like, let's say, the Skill Master materia or the ATB Assist materia, which basically help you, charge the ATB gauges of your other characters, whether that's by performing the same skill or performing different skills. It's just nice little bonuses so you don't actually, let's say, have to swap over to Aerith and have her, manual attack just so you can build up your ATB bar, just so you can cast an ability. It's something you should definitely experiment with. I've played, the majority of the playthrough with a few of these, and they're very useful. It's just for this final boss fight, for some reason, I didn't actually implement them into my build. And honestly, that's pretty much it. You could obviously go in many different directions. This is not the only way of doing it. This is just my way of doing it. And I hope you guys learned something. I hope you found this entire video useful. Let me know how you enjoyed the game or this final boss fight, because like, again, I thought it was like perfect. So cool. But anyway, you guys take care, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.